And welcome into another off-season edition of Spits and Suds. Thank you so much for joining and supporting our podcast. I'm Gavin Spittle of 1053 The Fan, donning the professor cap. Call me Professor Gavin Spittle tonight. And joining me is the Dean, David Castillo of D Magazine. His Substack is called Star Stack. Why is he the Dean and why am I a professor? Because tonight's off-season program is final grades time before we let the kids out of school for the summer. It is Dallas Stars grades. Let's go and say hi to our man David tonight. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing good, a lot better now that I saw your pregame warm up, which kind of reminds me of like when boxers like need to stretch their jaw before the fight. Looks
Mhm.
kind of odd, but if that gets you in the zone, like I think that was a quality warm up.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to do what you got to do. I mean, this is the off season and I don't want to since my games have stopped, I want to make sure I don't pull any muscles here.
What are you talking about? GameStop, Florida and Edmonton. That's a super competitive series right now, isn't it, Gavin?
I mean, I'm really I got to say, I'm enjoying it, and this is what I love about like hockey is in years past, Stars are out, I'm out. And I know that's a lot of Stars fans listening to this. But I think when you make it to the Western Conference Finals, there are so many aspects that I'm looking at. How is Florida handling the Edmonton power play different? Can Florida strike against the Edmonton kill? How do they match up physicality wise? What about goaltending? The matchup against Jake Ottinger is one thing, but now you're playing Bob, and Bob is just on a tear. So there's so many little things that I think have like kind of like Stars sub stories that I'm really enjoying watching.
I think I think even if you're a casual fan, you should absolutely be doing the same thing just because it's interesting also to just kind of imagine what Dallas would look like versus Florida. And listen, let me know whenever you want to stop this because I know we have like a lot of grades to get through, but like I do think that looking at the finals is instructive for a lot of different reasons. One, Dallas is not beating that Florida team. And I don't say that necessarily because I think Dallas is the inferior team. In a lot of ways, I would expect them to do things that Edmonton can't against Florida. Dallas's blue line still superior, and I think with Edmonton, looking at Edmonton, you're kind of like, well, how is it that Dallas wasn't able to do some of this stuff versus the Oilers? Like, it's not like
Yeah.
anything changed. And I think that's probably one of the things that was most within Dallas's control, which was being able to muck it up. It's not like Edmonton is this, they're not Vegas, right? It's not like Dallas didn't have the capacity to push them around if they wanted to. And I'm not really into these kind of, I think sometimes cheap narratives. I know you like to bring up physicality. I think it's relevant. I think it can be a salient point. I just don't think. I think it's something that might have served Dallas well against Edmonton. Broadly speaking, however, I'm not so sure. Like, if Dallas had tried to play Florida that way, they would just got murdered.
Yeah. One matchup that I think would kind of give Florida some issues is Colorado. I think that would be a
Yes.
really interesting matchup.
Yeah, I think for all of Colorado's like flaws, I mean, that was still a really good team
Yeah.
that Dallas beat. And yeah, Colorado, one of the few teams that I think has just simply the speed to ignore what Florida does so well. Not to say it wouldn't be competitive, but styles make fights, as we saw with Dallas in the playoffs. And I think Colorado would be a unique match. It's kind of random.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Another big kind of story that it's kind of cool that it's getting a lot of viral attention, and this is before we get into Stars grades, but we want to hit this while it's relevant. The amount of talk about the Washington Capitals buying the website Cap Friendly, which to me, certainly the name says it all. I think it was a great resource for a hockey fan to play GM, and that will no longer be available after the upcoming NHL draft. And I wanted to get your thoughts because I find it fascinating that a team is buying a public website. And are we going to now see a trend of other quote unquote, even though this is salary, but analytic websites, become bought by these franchises.
I think, by the way, like I find it so amusing. I think so. First and foremost, like the what you call it, the news that was also revealed from Elliot Friedman is that essentially what you call it, essentially the I can't remember what his name is, but essentially Washington's owner
Yeah.
was essentially hiring the guys behind it. So as a result of that hiring, they kind of the end result and the logical outcome was to shut the website down. But the most revealing thing is that it clearly wasn't just fans that were using Cap Friendly. There were
Yes.
also NHL teams. Friedman made the comment about how there were only a handful of teams that would have been fine without it. And I'm just kind of like, that to me is the fascinating story, which is that NHL teams, these sort of billion-dollar. I mean, you would think that they would have their S together, and they don't, because I think
Well, you would
they're
think
just,
the league would provide that information for the teams as well, right? You would think.
and that's something else, right? I mean, that is the kind of information that should be, it just should be there. It's information, right? If you want people to be attracted to hockey and you want to get them into the game, then you need to attract different types of people. There are plenty of people that are nerds about this stuff. And hockey largely doesn't care. They're awful at marketing. They routinely can't, when it comes to like promoting their stars, it's still the classic I in team cliches and the good old boys club who just doesn't want to see that stuff. And so I think that seems to be part of it with things like, Cap Friendly and sort of the analytics and the fantasy draft nerds and things like that. And I don't get it. I don't agree with it. I think it's silly. And I think I kind of made this pseudo point on Twitter that if all the sort of publicly available analytics, which just went dark overnight, I have to imagine a sizable minority of teams will probably just be scrambling.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, completely legal and it's fine. But in a year where we've seen record growth in attendance, where we've seen very strong TV ratings, the ESPN TNT deal certainly has more relevancy compared to the old NBC where you didn't know what channel it was on. So there's that. And so you have a lot of good things going for you. And listen, this is not going to be the end all, but to me, from a league standpoint, I kind of would want this stuff out there. Some people say that the league doesn't want this stuff out there, but how is it a bad thing, similar to fantasy football, if your fans are playing GM and working on movements and knowing, well, that person can't be traded, but I can put this and this together along with a draft pick because this is the draft picks they have coming up. How is that a bad thing? That's chatter, and chatter is good for a league that needs it.
Yeah, it's like everything else. They're going to be dragged, kicking and screaming in the same way they finally uh, bit down and added. Granted, what do they call it? Like SAT, right? Which is supposed to be the equivalent of like shot attempts instead of just your garden variety, like shots on net, goals. They finally added some, higher level analytics. Wasn't really that great, and same thing with the player data. It's just like, I mean, these are things that plenty of leagues have been doing like well before hockey, and hockey just eventually catches up, even if it's like a few decades late.
Yeah, absolutely.
TuneIn is the audio platform with something for everyone. News.
In order to secure convictions in a court of law, it is essential that we conclusively.
Sports.
Got clock at 4. Doncic. The step back 3. You bet.
Music.
You set my world on fire. Yes,
and even podcasts. Whatever you love, hear it right here on TuneIn. Go to TuneIn.com or download the TuneIn app to start listening.
You don't just live in your home. You live in your neighborhood as well. So when you're shopping for a home, you want to know as much about the area around it as possible. Luckily, Homes.com has got you covered. Each listing features a comprehensive neighborhood guide from local experts. Everything you'd ever want to know about a neighborhood, including the number of homes for sale, transportation, local amenities, cultural attractions, unique qualities, and even things like median lot size and a noise score. Homes.com. We've done your homework.
Are you ready to provide your grades for the 2023-2024 Dallas Stars season, sir?
Yes, I'm worried that we're going to have, there's not going to be a whole lot of debate because, this was a really good team. So you're
Yes.
not going to have a whole lot of sort of critical analysis, but we'll get to it. We'll see. I don't know. I may change my mind on some of these grades.
We have oodles of players to get to, Mr. Castillo, and I will lead the way as the dean is my boss in this scenario. So I shall name the player and you give a grade and why, and I shall respond. And I agree with you. Very tough to give failing grades on a team that won the Central Division, that beat 2 Stanley Cup champions, and that made it to the Western Conference Finals for the second straight year. We start with Dallas Stars centers and Ty Dellandrea.
We're gonna work. It's gonna be a ascendant order. I see.
Oh, listen, I work hard on this podcast, David, but I cut and paste these names. Okay.
Dellandrea, I would give a C minus, and that probably seems high for a guy that was a healthy scratch and mostly just an afterthought. And part of this is just, to me, the reason why, the thing is, he just didn't have a chance.
Right.
If Dellandrea played 2 less games in his first season with the Dallas Stars, he would have technically been a rookie. And I think that would have affected people's perception of him. I think people would be a little less dismissive of, basically just him getting more opportunities. And so to me, I look at a player, the player that Dellandrea reminds me most of is Casey Cizikas. And I just feel like if there's a guy that can have a quality career on bottom 6, mostly fourth line, I don't see anything in Delandrea's game that makes me think he can't be the same thing. So kind of gets a low grade, not necessarily because of his play, although the penalty taken is still really annoying. But he's a guy that I think should have a roster spot. He should have had it, last season.
Yeah, one of the shocking things, David, when I was doing my prep for this podcast tonight is that you look at Ty Dellandrea only playing in 42 games. Nils Lundqvist played in 59. That's when you take a step back, you're like, wow, Dellandrea did not get a lot of action this year. What I like about Dellandrea is the energy he provided, at times. I agree with you. The penalties have to slow down or be eliminated, especially because it seems like he takes penalties at the worst time sometimes, a little over aggressive. But I would like to see him get regular minutes. I'm going to go with a grade of C. I think he was average because I wish he played more. Let's go to number 95, Matt Duchene.
Oh, man. Duchene, I'm going to give a B minus. I think because Duchene was just your classic front runner. And I think, he initially came to symbolize Dallas's depth. I think he's a player that still has a few good seasons left in him, but he's also a guy who in the playoffs, kind of you see sort of what, his limits are. And of course, he's always been a fairly, I think, kind of single layer forward, not necessarily two-way. And I think still talented, still a guy that, I think could easily be brought back on a team-friendly deal. But I do think he's a player that if he's not brought back, I'm not complaining because to me, I'm a big fan of Maverick Bourque. So really good player, but also a player with a ceiling and also an older player. So, good, obviously great production, but the performance to me was lacking.
I am soft when it comes to these grades tonight, David, and here's why. I think Matt Duchene, hearing him at the end of the year and what he went through as far as trying to heal from a surgery off season, finding out your team is cutting you, your family lives in that town, so you have to pick up, move, meet new teammates. And as he was saying in his post-season interview, it was a whirlwind. And basically for the first 60 games, he went on robotics and then he kind of tired out at the end. That is on Matt Duchene, but I am taking into consideration all that he dealt with. One of the other things I'll give Matt Duchene credit for, I feel as though he really helped Mason Marchment and Tyler Seguin this year. So for those reasons, I give him a solid B.
What was my
Yo,
grade, by the way? That is so soft, by the way. For you to bring in like
yeah,
human emotion and
it is.
interaction into these grades, come
It's
on,
the
dude.
off season, man. It's the off season. I'm still emotional in a good way about this team. All right. We bring in a Gavin Spittle point of contention in the past, but will he change his opinion when Radek Fox is graded, David?
Man, I really did not expect this order. So Radek Faxa to me, just like a straight D. It's and I almost kind of hate saying that because I feel like there are parts of his game that I've kind of accepted are just not there anymore. Like the offense, just not there anymore. So in the absence of that, what does he provide? And he's still a quality defensive forward. The reason I say D is again, this is unfair. In the same way you're bringing in human emotion, totally valid. I appreciate that. I'm going to bring in the cap, and it's just like you cannot have a $3.2 million player
Correct.
getting healthy scratched, and it being just a totally valid scratch too, right? I mean, to me, it's just for what he's paid.
Yeah.
I just can't accept it. I mean, like I'm almost I want to give him an F just kind of to do the Skip Bayless thing, but I'm not gonna go. I don't feel like there was any player that really deserved an F. Maybe we'll get to one, but I don't think there is. Radek Faxa comes close mainly because his cap in proportion to expectation.
The cap was getting on my nerves throughout the season. Craig Ludwig told me to forget about the cap. So I said, all right, I'll forget about the cap. I actually think Radek Fox had an improved year. I agree with you on the healthy scratch. I agree with you on the salary cap. That's tough space. What are you going to do with Radek Fox in the offseason? I think he sticks around for another year. I'm going to give him a solid C- to maybe a C.
I think that's basically a D. You're talking yourself out of it is the
Yeah,
problem.
I'm soft. I'm being nice to the students. All right, since you are questioning my order, is there someone else you'd like to hear next, sir?
No, like it's more of just like I just listen. I was a little rattled. I think
Yeah.
I'm steady now because like these are to me it's what's funny is these are some of the most interesting players to kind of look back on and analyze because just pound for pound, like they're probably the hardest to grade because I would say that for a lot of these guys, incomplete. Like Delandra to me is incomplete.
Yeah, I agree.
Duchesne, like just the polarizing, like great regular season, even if he trailed off, and then the playoffs, which that one moment against Colorado, but otherwise absent. So that's what I mean. Tough to grade. You're doing a really good job of scrambling my brains. So listen, no criticism here.
We continue with the centers on this team. Number 53, Wyatt Johnston.
I mean, it's got to be an A+. I mean, it's not just the analytics, which I think are a big deal and should be taken seriously. Like when there is a micro stat rating that has Johnston below Connor McDavid and above everybody else, including Leon Draisaitl, that's a pretty big deal. But also just the fact that shift to shift, the dude was a constant threat. And even if he was a 20-year-old veteran in this league, I would still be impressed by what he was able to do. Yeah, the production kind of waned, and part of me wanted to give him just like a straight A instead of A+.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to do that. But I mean, even in the playoffs, like to me, it just felt like he was when his production fell off. To me, he just seemed unlucky, not like a guy who was just kind of failing to perform.
Yeah, absolutely. 82 games played, 65 points, 32 goals, 33 assists. The thing that impresses me most about Wyatt Johnston, David, is I still, after 2 years, cannot count on my hand the number of mistakes he's made. He is just a solid two-way player that I think still has some more ceiling if it's possible. Just a terrific player, maturing, finds space, kind of avoids any kind of physicality in a good way. Can work his way to the front of the net. So he has so many things going for him. I agree. I give him an A+.
By the way,
yeah.
I was just going to say, I used to think that sort of for Johnston, the closest comparable was say like a Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and I realize like some Stars fans may be like, "What? No, dude." Nugent-Hopkins had 100 point season the other year. Like he's a fantastic player.
If he has a career like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, I'm in.
But his former head coach, Mark Savard, did compare him to Bergeron. And I thought that was just like gassing up kind of, nonsense. Like it's nice, but it's just that it's a gesture. And now I'm kind of like, he's nothing like Bergeron. Like stylistically, like there's just nothing like, but the two-way part of his game, I think, has not quite reached the levels that we assume, but all the pieces are there to get there. And that's the other thing that impressed. That's another reason why he gets an A+. Well-rounded, good defensively.
Every time you bring up like a guy like Mark Savard, I get mad at Matt Cook because the hit that he put on Mark Savard, ruining his career. I absolutely loved watching Mark Savard play.
And clearly the NHL is ashamed of that moment. Really doesn't want to see stuff like that ever happen again, given what happened to Barkov, obviously.
Yeah, that was frustrating to watch. I mean, clearly the arms are lifted. It's frustrating. It's frustrating. And
we'll be here for another 30 minutes if we get in like sidetracked into that.
Yeah, no, I know. I just don't like, you got to call it, man. Doesn't matter the player that does it. It doesn't matter if like, I know it matters as far as suspension if that player doesn't have past instances, but I don't care if it's Leon Draisaitl. I mean, that's just a bad hit in so many ways. I mean, an elbow to the jaw like that, come on, it's the Stanley Cup final. You basically took out their best player or one of their best players. And by the way, a player that was playing unbelievably defensively. Okay. Interesting one here, Joe Pavelski. Will David have any leniency on the I'm going not to play next year, Joe Pavelski?
No, because and the reason why is I'm just going to focus on the on-ice product. Yes, Pavelski's a great story. We know it. And it was one of the things that was difficult to write today for D Magazine when, basically kind of made the argument like this guy was in the same way that we could not have Ryan Sutter on the top pair. Pavelski just could not be on that top line. And so for me, I would say like a C+. And I know that's kind of crazy because he had a super productive year. But
yeah, second on the team in points.
Yeah, but to me, like it's just production was never. To me, I look at production as I try to look at production on a continuum, not necessarily on kind of a year-to-year basis. And it was clear really throughout the year that he just didn't have it anymore. And so I just kind of think, to me, when I think of Pavelski and the run that Dallas had, I think of just the weight on Robertson and Hintz, the fact that you had a player that was like the fourth most used forward, and that Dallas was essentially just punting shifts with this guy on the ice.
Yeah.
And I know I say this guy, we're talking about Pavelski and just, lacking the reverence that I should have. Again, Pavelski, like I am not taking anything away from his career in general, but in terms of on-ice product, and I mean from shift to shift, not from goal to goal or power play assist to power play assist, just from shift to shift, not a good player. And just, and again, that's not on him. That's just father time.
Yeah. I think that's well said. That's a great plug for your article on D Magazine, rightfully so. And I think that, boy, this is tough for me because he's meant such great things for the organization, both on and off the ice. Good regular season, but the playoffs, how can you kind of ignore that? So for that reason, I'm going to give him a B-, and I would give him a harder grade if it was just playoffs. So it's a tough one. It's a great career. I think you and I could do a whole podcast on whether he's a Hall of Fame player. I think that's debatable in so many ways because there are comparisons out there that are not in the Hall of Fame. So interesting. But we have a lot of players to get to. Tyler Seguin.
Man, that's another really difficult one. Like my instinct is to say Seguin. I'm going to go with a B-. I think because he seemed to be really kind of also a product of Duchene's hot start. And I think just in terms of perception, I think Seguin is still a really good player. I think is kind of like a unique player in terms of how he's kind of reinvented himself.
Yes.
going from just a top scorer to really just kind of like really a grinder. And I think in that sense, like I would grade him a lot higher, except that he like look at his defensive metrics, man. It was just like a tale of two seasons. Like he just seemed to trail off in the last half, and so he's unlike Ben. Sagan really is a player that kind of needed the physicality that he had. And losing that, I think, is always going to just, require him to nickel and dime his way towards points. And so I'm really not sure how to grade him. Like I felt like he was moderate in the playoffs, and he's a guy that just really works really hard. But in the end, like he's not a player. Like to me, Sagan is probably the player that's going to kind of end up in the bottom six next season, and be a little bit of an afterthought. Not to say he won't be important to the team, but just that me personally, I see them trying to stack the top six and forgetting about this roll four lines logic. Not because it didn't necessarily work, but just that I think it's going to be what they have to do in the absence of Pavelski and even potentially Duchesne. I mean, that's not a given that he comes back.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Duchesne certainly helped the cause. That was arguably one of the more consistent lines when it was hitting. 68 games, 52 regular season points. He did go over the 20 goal mark with 25 goals. Was coming back and getting healthier and healthier as far as injuries. I agree with you, David. I think he's turned into a really nice two-way player. The comparison I have, I mean, different like makeup, but Dustin Brown, and how Dustin Brown was tailing off fast. And then all of a sudden, his career kind of, I don't want to say blossom, but kind of came back a little bit toward the end. So I don't know what you think about that comparison, Dustin Brown of the LA Kings, but I would give Tyler Sagan a solid B because I think he was improved from the year past.
And look, I can't say anything about the Dustin Brown comparison because I don't want to think about Dustin Brown and his constant like elbowing. Just like one of those, like he wasn't like Matt Cook level, but like he was definitely one of the dirtier players of his time.
Oh yeah. No, there's no doubt about that. Craig Smith, 75 games. An interesting pickup off-season, NHL vet, basically from the minimum. Good signing by Jim Nill, 20 points on the year, 33 years old. What'd you think of Craig Smith's performance?
I'm gonna go with B plus. I'm tempted to say A minus because Smith is a guy that, for whatever reason, was never given the opportunity to play above that fourth line, and I think he
Yeah.
had the ability. To me, he had not just the talent, which yeah, sure is not what it once was, but still was just like every time he was on the ice was just like like a 5 hour energy drink. Like he just seemed to have like a solid motor, pushed play, and helped Dallas's offense. Really, like he's a player that I really would have liked to have seen. Say like on the third line when it just became goulash, right? And they were trying to like stack the top line in the playoffs. So I thought he was just really good. I'm honestly shocked that he was ever a healthy scratch. And
Yeah.
I'm sure people point out like the record with Dallas in the playoffs without Craig Smith, which I don't think really means anything. But also, like, he should have been in the lineup to me. Like, I don't know why he was taken out.
I love his size. I love that he has great confidence shooting the puck. I agree with you. Would have been interesting to see him on some different lines. I'm interested in seeing will Craig Smith come back because do they have enough room? The salary's right, but will another team see what he did this year and say, you know what? Let's give Craig Smith a job. So interested to see. I would give Craig Smith a solid A minus. Thought he was really good. Let's go to the rookie call-up, Logan Stankoven. Will technically be a rookie next year as well, but enough games under his belt that this professor will offer a grade. You, David?
A plus. Yeah, just like all the way A plus. I mean, this was Stankoven was a guy that was not just what you call it. Yeah, sort of his production trailed off, but he's clearly a player that is is going to be in like a shoe in for 60 plus points pretty much every season. Just the I personally, I know he has an official nickname and all that good stuff. I prefer Oven Master because he's always cooking. And I've got other positive things to say about the endless forward. I mean, he's just on the forecheck, an absolute monster. And there's just no reason to think he's gonna slow down just because he's young and inexperienced. No, like he is basically to me an emerging veteran, and there's just, I mean, also the fact that he's so good in all three zones is just another plus. It's just another win for Dallas's scouts, like between Johnson and Stankoven. Like that 2021 draft, man, it's really coming close to me to being as good as the 2017 draft.
Yeah. Yeah. I give it an A+ as well. Interested to see next year, David, if they'll pair Bork with Stankoven.
So does that mean they're putting Johnson on the top line with Robertson and Hintz?
I think you almost have to at this point, right?
I don't know. I mean, if maybe they bring in Jonathan March or so, maybe that's their forward signing.
Well, all right. I have another scenario. Maybe this is a different podcast. Do I go out with my excess of centers and go get myself another playmaker and or really good defenseman?
I mean, to me, I think it's got to be the defenseman, just because even if, for one, I mean, like you have that Maverick Bork, for example, like it's, he needs, like there's no way they can put him back in the AHL, and he's exactly what Dallas needs in terms of another playmaking quality young forward. But I think the other thing too is that just like, well, if you want to explore, I mean, if you want to get ahead of S. Lindell, right? Because S. Lindell has one more year, and people don't talk about this enough, but S. Lindell has one more year, and I realize this could make things really awkward, and we're in magical Christmas land, armchair GMing. But if you want to get ahead of a post Lindell world, you kind of have the perfect setup where Heiskanen maybe goes back to a strong side. Harley, can handle top 4 minutes, and maybe that's your player behind Heiskanen, maybe not. But even if not, you still have Liam Bixel waiting in the wings, who is already playing pro hockey right now. And this is the perfect year to do this. Brett Pesce, an unrestricted free agent. Matt Waugh, unrestricted free agent. I mean, there are some really good defensemen that they could sign to just fortify this whole thing and forget about everything else and just have, I think, a quality lineup.
All right, let me throw this other scenario out as we take a pause on grading your 2023-24 stars. Is there any forward or anyone in this lineup that minus probably Miro, but Steve Stais is saying no, Brady Tkachuk is staying in Ottawa. But I make the argument that minus Wyatt Johnston, like, I'm just going to be real honest. If it was Jason Robertson for Tkachuk, I'm doing it.
Oh man, that is.
I
We're
know.
really bringing out the big guns in this player grades episode.
It is, because I'm just saying to myself, like, okay, this is what, like, I love Robertson. This is not an indictment on Jason Robertson. We haven't got to him yet. I really love what he brings to and candidly, I think he's a future possible captain of this team. So I love everything he brings to the table. But what I'm getting in Tkachuk is a guy that's a grinder, that loves being in front of the net, that doesn't mind mucking it up and provides energy night after night. And oh, by the way, over 70 points last year.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that so Tkachuk is definitely not the offensive player that Robertson is,
Right.
and I would say that Robertson has really has come into his own as a quality defensive winger as well. But I do love Brady Tkachuk's game, and I love his game not because of like the physicality. Yes, it's a nice bonus, but I love like his movement with the puck. He's a little bit more nimble than Robertson, and you know what? Stars fans are gonna hate this. I would do it.
Yeah, I think it just shakes it up. My friend asked me last night, we were talking hockey on the phone during the Stanley Cup, and he's like, "You'd really do that?" I'm like, I got to be honest with you. I love that name, Tkachuk. If Keith Tkachuk was available, the father, I'd probably do it for a few games. Just plop him in front of the net. He'd probably get me a point or two.
Well, hopefully you're doing it for like hockey reasons and not just like the cool last name. But
Yeah. Probably the wrong league to do bits in. Yes, I agree. But I just think the Kachucks bring so much to the table. So I just love their competitive spirit. But that's not taking anything away from the current Stars roster. I just think I don't want to change. This is a future podcast. I don't want to change up the entire roster, but I also don't want to roll it back for the third straight year. I'm interested to see the pieces that come in and the pieces that leave. All right. That being said, we end the center discussion with an interesting pickup by Jim Nill in that Minnesota did not tender an offer to Sam Steele, making him a free agent. He comes to Dallas and has himself a pretty good year, David.
yeah, to me, he's a quality A minus. Actually, I'm going to go with just a solid A, right? Just solid A because pound for pound, he was a player that you really like noticed, even though he was buried on the fourth line. And I realized, like, even in the context of DeBoer likes to roll four lines and Dallas is four lines deep, and we're gonna put the fourth line against the top line, which honestly I don't really care for. Like I think having depth is like that will stand on its own, right? You don't need to sort of make a show of it and put them. But even in that context, I thought Sam Steele was just fantastic. There's really nothing I can say about him that I mean, he was the backbone of that fourth line, right? I mean, when we weren't sure what the fourth line would be, because we're kind of like, well, Radfax has got to stay, right? That didn't end up being the case. And then you're like, well, Ty Delandry's got potential, right? I mean, of all the players that could have been scratched, that could have been an afterthought, Sam Steele was the guy, but proved it night in, night out that no, this was the one who was going to stay in no matter what.
Steele is a restricted free agent. A lot of people don't realize this. He's only 26 years old, so he's not old. So interested to see what Jim Nill offers.
Also, the player they should have drafted instead of Riley Tufte.
There's probably a good argument on that. Yeah. So I was watching Riley Tufte when he was playing in college, and I'm like, you know what? I trust. Maybe they're seeing something that I don't. He just never developed. I loved his size, but it just wasn't there. Yeah, it's kind of a shame. All right, let's move on to the wings. The captain, Jamie Benn.
I think gotta go with an A minus. Like he's a player that I think all of the nerdonauts like myself. No, actually, I don't consider myself like a nerd. You know, to me, I'm just a writer. Okay, like yes, I occasionally use analytics, but the regression thing there was every reason to believe that regression should have hit him last year, should hit him this year, and it just never really did. I think a lot of it, honestly, though, I do think it helps that he's next to Wyatt Johnson and later Logan Stankoven. I do think they're the ones really kind of driving that line, but getting the most out of Ben and seeing what Ben still has was a pleasure. And I think also he was absolutely one of the better players in the playoffs. That was a dude that came to play. And so, yeah, not a whole lot of bad things to say about Ben, and better yet, kept his cross checks in his pocket.
Yeah. I give him a solid B plus. I would love to have a off the record conversation with Jamie Benn and just ask why the Stars get off to so many slow starts and if he has an explanation. But I think that the players respect him, and you're right. It's quite the revival of the career in that we're not talking about that contract as much. The Sagan and Ben contract for about a good 2 years was basically one of the focal points of Stars talk. So to not be talking about that and to have pieces around those two guys and to split them up effectively, I think that's really good. Jamie Benn with 1 year left. So it'll be fascinating to see what the future holds for the captain, but I'm going to give him a solid B plus. Evgeny Dodonov.
You know, I'm giving him a B plus too. Like Dodonov is another player that could have easily just sort of faded into the background. I realized like his regular season was different. Part of that was because, he was injured for, part of the regular season. But when it got down to the marrow, and I mean, he was just a fantastic, again, bottom six, mostly an afterthought, but was one of the better players in the playoffs. I mean, like to the extent that Dallas's depth was still relevant, Dadonov was the sort of the main thread within that story.
Yeah, I brought this up on Spits and Suds when he came back and when he was kind of scratched and then put on a fourth line situation and they asked him about it, he was more concerned about the win. And he had every opportunity after having a big game to talk about himself, but he talked about the team. And he said, they can put me wherever they want. I'm just glad to be on this team and I'm glad to be playing. I think that said a lot about him as far as the room, grabbing the center of attention, but focusing on the team. I like that a lot. He's the kind of guy that if you're in the Western Conference Finals or Stanley Cup, he can come up big for you. There are bursts of talent that you're like, wow, he's really talented. I give him a solid A minus. I think it was a solid year, minus the injury, which happens, and glad to have him back next year. Rope Hintz.
Oh man, this should be interesting. Like I'm gonna go with just like a straight B. I think because yes, there are a lot of things we can criticize about Hintz's game, despite the fact that he did score 30 goals yet again, third consecutive season. But between like the points in the regular season and then the playoff performance, which there's really like no good excuse, right? I mean, he was struggling before the injury, thanks to Nathan McKinnon, and then afterwards, clearly just fighting it. But the reason why I'm giving him more credit than I think most people will is because I think you really saw in the Edmonton series and kind of like the tail end of the Colorado series, how critical Hintz's job is and what he's been able to do with that experience facing the tough matchups. Because when Johnston all of a sudden when the Johnson line was the one getting the tough matchups, kind of saw them struggle, which is expected. Like that's not a criticism of Johnston or the line in general, but they did become a little bit quieter. And I think that really helped emphasize how important Hintz is to really like the stability of the way Dallas is able to play a game that is responsible and defensive, but that can also counterpunch at any time. And I think there are very few forwards who symbolize that better than Hintz, even if his like general kind of production was lacking.
I would love to see him a little bit more consistent. Clearly, he's one of the best. And when he is playing at the best, he is talked about nationally, where who they have to pay attention to? That Stars player Rope Hintz. However, there are nights where it's just not there. And I say that respectively because the whole piece of the puzzle is effective. I just want to see the breakout where it's like, wow, are we talking about Rope Hintz as a potential elite player in this league? And I think we can have the same argument with Robertson as well. These are players that some games you're like, oh my goodness. And I think the consistency is one of the things. And that's what made the Stars what they are, in that they could roll out multiple lines. And this, David, there were times where, one line stepped to the front and then all of a sudden another line stepped to the front because that line took a back seat. So I'm going to give him a solid B plus. I think there's a lot of potential there under a long-term contract. Let's move on to Mason Marchment.
I'm going to go with also a solid B. He's definitely the kind of player that, like with Sagan, you really have to wonder like how much of their regular season production performance was a product of just Matt Duchene absolutely going like just bananas in the first half of the season. And he's a player that like I felt like, he's maybe just kind of a product of Duchene. But then I guess as the season kind of wore on, I think he did a lot of things that really sort of helped prove that, his previous season was, I think, really just quite unlucky. And so overall, I thought he had a good season. He's definitely a player that I don't think is going to be back once his contract is up. But I think he did good. Like nothing great, nothing crazy, but and not just because he was better than last season, but because I think he actually had a real sort of tangible impact from shift to shift for most of the season.
And we end the forwards with Jason Robertson.
Yeah, to me, I'm still giving him. I think I want to say A plus. I'm going to give him just a straight A, just because I think the development of his defensive game was massive. You also saw it in just kind of the dramatic moments where he's just laying the body, blocking shots, and he was extremely productive in the postseason. Yes,
Yes.
he didn't like score like a ton of goals, and all of it was pretty much concentrated in that one Edmonton game, but I think for the most part, like really showed his kind of, that sort of the new look Jason Robertson, who's maybe not a 100-point forward anymore, but is an 80-point two-way winger, which I think is great. And again, I go back with Hintz and Robertson. I go back to the fact that they had an anchor on their line for most of the season. Again, no disrespect, but that's part of it for me.
I love the versatility as far as goals and assists, where if you look at the goals previously, 46 goals, amazing. That was big part of his 109-point season a year ago. 51 assists come back. I mean, the consistency over 2 years, you're right. Maybe doesn't go over 100 again, but the last 3 seasons, David, 79 points, 109 points, and 80 points. That's a real solid player on a very fair contract. Kudos, Jim Nill. I give him a solid A. So that is the forward group. Before we get into the defensemen on this Dallas Stars team, I did want to give a shout out because when we started this podcast, it was about growing hockey in DFW. And a big thing happened last night, David, in that 2 future superstars were drafted in the PWHL, Professional Women's Hockey League. Congratulations to Hannah Bilka of Capel, who has been on Spits and Suds, a terrific interview, drafted 4th overall by Boston. Allison Simpson out of Frisco, drafted in the 3rd round by the New York PWHL team. And tomorrow on the program, we will gladly welcome another future star, Kaylee Lewis, who currently plays for the Lady Catamounts of UVM, had an awesome season for UVM, and the McKinney native will join us to talk about her growth, starting in McKinney, ending up at UVM. So pretty excited about that. The growth of female hockey is here. Awesome to see the crowds they drew in the PWHL. So congratulations, David, to Hannah and Allison.
By the way, I really appreciate you doing this because I mean it's like I've been meaning to sort of watch more of like the women's hockey because I've kind of just mostly like just absolutely ignored what's been going on just with I'm not sure like kind of where I'm going with this, but the point is I appreciate you doing that because I do think it's important. I think I've seen a lot of like highlights and it looks awesome.
Yeah.
And listen, if you're a hockey nerd, like there's no reason why you shouldn't be interested in sort of every aspect of hockey played by different people.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I think it would be wrong of us to talk about the growth of DFW hockey without putting a pretty big spotlight on the females, because just in general, it was really cool the other day when I was talking about DFW and the growth of hockey and mentioning names like Blake Coleman and Stefan Neusen and the Jones brothers, and then mentioning Hannah Bilka. I mean, it's so cool. The Dallas Stars tweeted out, when she was drafted, there she is, basically. And the spotlight that they put on her is so cool. And the fact that this little program had something to do with it, I will gladly take it because it's not about us. It's about Hannah. And the fact that she's on Team USA and representing our country and she hails out of Capel, to me, any Olympic athlete and any person representing the USA from this area needs to have a spotlight. Thrived at Boston College, won a national championship at Ohio State, now with Team USA. It's just awesome to see. So she deserves that. And you know what? Kudos to Allison. Had a terrific year at Colgate. They were in the women's Frozen Four. Unfortunately, they fell short because it was going to be super cool to see Allison from defensively take on Hannah, Frisco taking on Capel. That would have been really cool. It didn't happen, but really, really cool that, both players were expected to get drafted. Both bring a lot to the table. So really cool tomorrow to talk to Kaylee and see if she's had any interactions with those two. And that's another future star that's going to be drafted from DFW. So I love the growth of hockey in the South, and I love the growth of hockey in Texas, because for a while, my friend, we were talking about Tyler Myers and taking credit for him, even though he moved as a kid from Houston.
I can't wait for you to get into deep cuts, like talking about the Mayan astronomers from the Mexican Hockey League.
I can do this on this podcast, right? This is what off-season programming is all about.
For super casual fans, that's his real team, by the way.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Okay, back to the grading system. Let's start with a player that's interesting. An interesting career with the Dallas Stars in Yanni Hakanpää.
Oh man, I was gonna go with this D plus. To me, like the Hakanpää was. I know people are kind of like, man, it's like, well, if only Hakanpää were healthy, and I'm just like, if Hakanpää were healthy, he would have played more than someone like Lundqvist and Petrovic, and would have probably even been a bigger problem, because he just he wasn't, to me, he just wasn't good this year.
Right.
And I think, and I don't know if maybe the injury that he had is maybe something that kind of was built up over time, because I mean, I thought when he first came in, he was mostly fine. Obviously fine in Carolina, but also he's had a pretty short career, and I just don't think that he's a player that has the profile of somebody that can be a contributing depth pair and defender, but just kind of seems to be going backwards a little bit. He's to me, he's not a bad player. I just thought this year was kind of a bad performance, and going back to the playoffs last year, he's a dude that you would think would cover more ice and just doesn't seem to. So yeah, I mean, not really the interesting dude that we thought we were getting.
So what did you give him as a grade? D
minus, actually.
D minus. Yeah. I would agree. Terrific career. Any player that plays that length of time in the NHL, good for, stick tap. But at the same time, I think it's time to move on, especially with the defensive help on the way. Thomas Harley, great regular season. Up there with the NHL lead as far as defensemen with goals, but something happened in the playoffs. What are your thoughts, David?
I'm gonna give him a solid A. I think the thing that happened in the playoffs is just that he's a young dude. He not just being young, but really the first time stepping up like that with competition that he faced, and also the minutes that he played, and that went for everyone. Even the veteran defenders were absolutely affected by that. So to me, I think. And it wasn't just necessarily about hey, he kind of struggled, but he's just a young dude. But man, he had the great regular season. No, I actually thought he showed development in the postseason with his defensive work. I mean, this is a guy that kind of turned into the sort of stabilizing defensive presence along with Heiskanen in the Colorado series. So, and especially the tail end of the Vegas series. So I think Harley is just fantastic. I still stand by him as an emerging elite defenseman. And it was weird to see the goals just magically dry up, but I don't take that seriously as a long-term thing.
I'm going to give him an A minus. Would have liked to seen more effectiveness as far as postseason power play, but that probably is a team thing, not necessarily a Thomas Harley thing. I'm excited about 2024, 2025 Thomas Harley. And this is going to be probably, of all the players off season wise, minus Tanev, probably this is the second biggest contract negotiation as far as Jim Nill dealing with. Does he go on a bridge deal? similar to what Jake Ottinger kind of has right now? Or does he go long term with Thomas Harley? And what is the number? So it's going to be fascinating to see what happens and can they get a deal done? And when can they get it done? And if they don't get it done and a tender is made, does Thomas Harley show up to camp? We'll see. But a lot of interesting things in the Thomas Harley camp in the off season. Miro Heiskanen, I think I know the answer to that, my friend.
It's got to be an A. Like I almost want to say A plus. I'm not going to say A plus though, but it's definitely an A. I think mainly because he just did such a great job, and I think it got ignored over stuff like that power play goal that McDavid scored on him, versus the thousands of other minutes throughout the season where he was just fantastic. There was that 7-game stretch where he was not on the ice for a single goal against at even strength in the playoffs. So Heiskanen, it's I think because Tanev was so good at playing defense, like at just shutting other players down, people forget that Heiskanen, and this is actually a thing that I'm kind of critical of Dallas for, which is that don't forget that Heiskanen is really a shutdown defenseman, just happens to have an offensive player's talents. And I wouldn't mind them to kind of see them, split the responsibilities with him and Tanev, assuming they, re-sign him. But I thought Heiskanen, I still maintain, get him back on his strong side. Mother of God. I mean, I get that you're sort of limited, especially with the roster. You can't just have it happen via sorcery. But to me, if you it's so weird that Dallas, they expect him to improve offensively and defensively. And we saw some of this kind of forced with the slap shots. No, choose. If you want him to be a shutdown defenseman, he can be that. Don't ask for a bunch of offense as well while he's on his weak side. You can't do both from that position. And that's not to say that this is going to be the ultimate thing that brings Dallas down or keeps them from reaching their potential. But I just don't. I'm not listening to Miro Heiskanen criticisms if you're thinking that he's going to be magical offensively and magical defensively on his weak side. You don't see Cale Makar do it. You don't. I mean, I could keep on going. You don't see Adam Fox do it, et cetera, et cetera. And see, now you got me in a vendetta kind of mood, Gavin.
No, this is good. I think we were all surprised when the Tanev trade was made that he did not go up to that first line defensively and play with Miro, because to all of us, it seemed like, all right, now we can put Miro on the strong side. So interesting to see what they do with Miro next year. I would personally love to see a defensive defenseman like Tanev or someone like that. You've mentioned a couple of names, David, that allows a little bit more freer Miro. He's still going to be good defensively, but when he rushes the zone and he uses his speed, to me, there's the one and only Cale Makar, but it is Cale Makar-like. And I would like to see that more from the Dallas defensemen. They have weapons on the blue line. And, I would love to see them causing a lot of pressure in the offensive zone, because once again, you have that more defensive defenseman back there to kind of cover for you. That's not going to allow an odd man breakout. All right. So therefore I give him an A as well. Esa Lindell, a really, really nice kind of bounce back year. However, really thrived when Tanev was with him. We forget that Esa Lindell was paired with Ryan Suter in the Western Conference Finals the year prior.
I'm giving Lindell a B minus, which is probably low for a lot of people. I think the only reason why I'm giving him a B minus is not because, and he's a player I've kind of been critical of in the past, but really come to appreciate as this kind of unique odd duck of a shutdown defenseman. But I think the reason why I'm giving him a B minus is not because of his on ice play, because it really emphasized when Chris Tanev was brought in, it really sort of brought home kind of what Dallas is paying for. Lindell gets paid a lot, 5.8 per year. I mean, this is why I really feel like they won't bring him back when his contract ends, along with Ben after next season, which is that, when Tanev went down, did anybody look at S. Lindell as like, okay, well, we'll just turn to S. Lindell to like, be the go-to guy to shut down? No, I mean, he plays that kind of game, but I
Right.
just for what Lindell, to me, Lindell is not worth the Ekholm contract, and that's probably what he's going to get. And so I just can't help but feel like, well, we saw what a real shutdown defender looks like in Tanev, and I personally think Heiskanen is pretty much just as good as Tanev, and so I think that's kind of my thing with S. Lindell. It's unfair. I'm really like treating S. Lindell unfairly here, but I guess because I feel like they have so much potential on the left-hand side with maybe like Heiskanen back on a strong side, Harley beneath him, like Bixel, whatever. And I just think that, maybe I'm just kind of preparing myself for that. Maybe that's what
Yeah,
it is.
I give him a B, but I agree with you. I think once that contract ends, there are other players that can kind of do the same. Just solid player, especially when he was paired with Tanev. But at the same time, that contract does sting every once in a while. Well, we have to bring him up in conversation. Nils Lundkvist did play, a bunch of games for the Dallas Stars, specifically during the regular season, and did get his 4 minutes of playoff time per game, maybe even less in the postseason. Very polarizing figure, as Sean said at one point. I'm sick of talking about a third pairing defenseman.
I love it. I mean, with my Julius Honka avatar, I love it.
I mean, listen, that is a terrific comparison because size-wise, it is interesting, the Nils Lundkvist, Julius Honka comparison. So, what do you give him for a grade, David? Because, I mean, I think that whether or not you agree, and I think we both agree that we would have liked to seen the Stars use him differently when he had the opportunities. It didn't seem as though he could ever put something together as far as you'd see flashes, but no sustainability.
Listen, you guys could pick me apart on Twitter, or do y'all have a comment section for Spits and Suds?
We're still growing, sir. Not yet, but we
All
shall
right.
soon. It's
Well,
usually under my Twitter. Yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, this is gonna sound funny because I'm giving him a C plus, whereas S. Lindell I just gave a B minus, and Lindell was a critical part of Dallas's top four that went deep into the playoffs and faced really tough matchups. But again, this is kind of pound for pound, right? This is in a vacuum, and I give him a C plus mainly because, for the most part, yes, Lundqvist is never going to be a top four defenseman. The question is whether or not you could still get value out of what he brings in a depth role. And I feel like he mostly kind of showed that. I feel like he mostly showed improvement in terms of kind of just trying to play within himself, recognizing that he was on a short leash, right? As soon as the new season started, and still being able to be what he is, which to me is a play finisher. He's not a puck mover. He's not a puck rusher. He's not what you think he is. However, he still is something unique, and I think something that has value. Like, I look at a team like San Jose's blue line. You mean to tell me that Lundqvist couldn't play a top four role on that blue line and probably be a 40, 50 point defenseman? I highly doubt it, right? And so I think he's an NHL quality player. And I think he's a player that coaches can potentially trust. And it's impossible to get your best when he's yanked out of a game after one mistake and then is playing 3 minutes a game in the playoffs. Yeah. So I mean, to me, that part is incomplete. Again, not a great defenseman, just a depth defenseman. I think unique within that profile, and so C plus, quality C plus.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to give him a little bit less. I'd love to, and I'm a pro Nils Lundkvist guy, but I'm going to give him a C minus because I wish he had taken advantage of the opportunities given, although completely agree with you. I think with consistency, we might have seen a better player. That said, I think the experiment has to be over. I think with a team that needs every dollar because they are up against the cap, I just think you have to let him walk, get another opportunity. Just admit that it's not working out here. If he thrives elsewhere, good for him.
Yeah, no, nothing to add there.
All right. So two that we could fall under incomplete would be Alexander Petrovic and Derek Pouliot. David, you're very good at following the Texas Stars. I just want to say, I mean, I think Petrovic made him some money, and I think he played pretty well down the stretch.
Am I the only one on an island here? I did not think Petrovic.
Really?
By the way, I apologize for interrupting you. If you were going to add anything else, please do.
I have incompletes. I don't think they played enough games.
Well, to me, I'm trying to grade them for the AHL. They're play in the AHL as well, and to me, like, I guess I get that you want to grade Petrovic on a curve, and he's a player that, like, listen, he played meaningful games for Florida many years ago, including a game where he got into 3 fights with Evander Kane, which is fantastic. You should all go watch it. Got busted up pretty good, so maybe don't watch it if you're a Petrovic fan. But it just, like, towards the end, it was just very clear, like, with his reads, his decision making, like his lack of puck skills. Like, I think if you're grading him on a curve, yeah, sure, I think he looked fine. If you're not, and just looking at what he gave you shift to shift, I'm just like, how is this any better than what Bixel would have done, who has way better puck control, a better skater, more speed? And yeah, I'm kind of, like, plug in, my sort of, the prospects are ready. Let the kids play, kind of angle. But no, I did not. And I felt the same way in the AHL, where it was very clear, even though Petrovic was kind of like the head honcho, it was very clear to me who the best defensemen in the AHL were as well, which was Bixel. And I think, the same is true of, like, Pouliot, where he's just not, he's just not really an NHL quality puck mover at this point in his career. And nothing against him. It's just kind of their birthright, right? These are players that, kind of fell out of the NHL for a reason, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the AHL is a quality league, and if you're able to play top minutes in the AHL, good for you, man. But I mean, in terms of being a part of the Dallas Stars roster for a team that has designs of winning a cup next season, no, that's not good enough.
We do want to give extra credit to Joel Hanley, who played in 32 games for Dallas. And I mean, Joel Hanley has found a way, kind of similar to Jordy Ben in that, like, sticking around as that 6th, 7th defenseman on various teams. And, that has some value. And Joel Hanley did provide some value as far as some defensive depth. But just wanted to mention that, he's forgotten, except when Lundqvist was only playing 2 minutes. Then it seemed like Joel Hanley was mentioned. Like, all of a sudden we completely missed Joel Hanley. So
by the way, what a bizarre career where you are essentially a healthy scratch for the regular season.
Yeah.
But as soon as one of your, like, prospects struggles, you're playing in the playoffs.
Yeah.
We trust you in the playoffs.
Yes.
We don't trust you in the regular season. What just a bizarre kind of Twilight Zone way of treating a player.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting too, in the post press conference, Tanev says that him and Hanley have been texting each other and they're going to grab a beer together at some point. So I thought that was interesting because Hanley ends up in Calgary. And that leads us to Christopher Tanev, a trade deadline deal just prior to it. And let me just say, might have given Jim Nill the GM of the Year award for pulling that trade off without giving up a first-round draft pick. The conditional second-round pick, because the Stars did not make the Stanley Cup final, ends up being a third-round pick. So came in, and David, you can do the rest, but pretty effective when you get a guy at the trade deadline and the priority in the offseason is re-signing him. And it was good to hear him the other day that saying he'd love to be back in Dallas.
That is insane. It's still insane to me. Like that I get that Calgary really liked Grushnikov. And for anybody that follows the Star Stack knows that I actually quite liked him. I talked about him throughout the season because he really, like, Grushnikov is kind of your modern day shutdown defender. And I feel like that's what Calgary thought. They thought, like, hey, here's a guy that can replace Chris Tanev. Now, do I think Grushnikov is that guy? No, but really interesting prospect. And what I would add to that, listen, we don't need to talk about Tanev. Tanev, A+, fantastic, especially at his age, and just was great in every way possible. But what I want to add to that is that The fact that Dallas did not give up a first-round pick is also relevant because since we're doing multiple shows at once tonight, I do want to mention that draft-wise, there are a lot of really good, big modern-day shutdown defenders that are going to be available where Dallas is picking. And so if Neil finds a guy that replaces Tanev, we're going to be talking about the trade in that respect as well.
Yep.
So I just want to kind of mention that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, absolutely. We end defensively with Ryan Suter. And I'm going to start for the first time on this show with my grade. I've always said, I think if you can forget about the salary, which I know is tough to do, Ryan Suter as a third pairing is actually pretty darn good. I gave him a solid B. I thought Ryan Suter had a good season. Didn't like him in the Edmonton. Maybe just being tired. But I also want to give Ryan Suter credit for this. And people can say all they want as far as, well, they practice together all the time so there's no real difference. But think about Ryan Suter throughout the year and the rotating defenseman. Add that to the playoffs where the rink gets smaller, and the fact that he had to play basically every shift with a different defenseman. I give him a lot of credit. Therefore, 1 year left on the contract. I give him a solid B. I think he comes back next year.
Man, like I was ready to be like, you know what? Yeah, Gavin, you're right. And then you mentioned him coming back next year. And I'm like, no. I would just give him a C. Like, was he way better than what we expected? Yes, especially in the playoffs. Like, I'm not going to deny for 1 second that like he just played way better. He was just a quality defender in those first couple series. And it kind of just seemed to come out of nowhere too, right? I mean, I think we all kind of more or less watched him closely because we're always thinking like, oh, well, when is the Sutter from Vegas from 2023 going to show up? And never did. And so for him to like have that in him, I think was really impressive. A lot of credit to Sutter. And hate to bring it back to Pavelski again. I'm sorry, guys. Like this is nothing personal, but unlike Pavelski, Sutter was still able to play meaningful shifts, still able to win minutes. The only reason why I give him a C though is because like I worry so much about, in the same way like Sutter seemed totally fine in his old age, quote unquote old age, then just hit a wall. I worry that happens with Sutter as well, and then we're kind of back to square one.
No, I don't disagree with that. I will say, so this is a different program, but if you did buy him out, that extends that contract for another year. So basically 24-25 per our friends at Cap Friendly. You're looking at a savings of $2.866 million. So
that's a lot. That's good.
That's a lot. That is a lot. Yeah. So if that's the case and they want to go in that direction, I'll agree with you, David. And that does put 25-26 $1.43 million back on the cap. We also have to, and we're going to do like a cap show as far as potential signings and everything at a different time, but we do have to mention that the Stars, we talk a lot when it was happening about what Vegas did as far as cap strategy and, all of a sudden the players got healthy. Well, your Dallas Stars are having a carryover as far as salary cap as well for what they did. So they just did it in a different way, but the Stars will be hit with some cap money this year, this upcoming year from this past year. So just wanted to make that point.
By the way, we may see a lot less of that now that Cap Friendly's down, given how much we know apparently they rely on that.
I know. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So
plug in a Hyundai EV and the extraordinary happens. It's not just the ultra-fast charging capability and long range in the Ioniq 5 and Ioniq 6, or the adventure-seeking spirit of the Kona Electric, or the groundbreaking 601 horsepower Ioniq 5N. And it's not just the comfort in knowing that every Hyundai EV is backed by a 10-year, 100,000-mile limited electric battery warranty. Hyundai's EVs transform a low hum into a loud adventure. They bring color to your journey and turn energy into main character energy. So forget everything you thought you knew about EVs and turn the extraordinary into something truly electrifying. There's joy in every journey.
EPA estimated 303-mile driving range for 2024 Ioniq 5 SE SEL limited rear-wheel drive and 361-mile driving range for 2024 Ioniq 6 SE long-range rear-wheel drive with fully charged battery. Estimated range varies for other models and trims and depends on battery capacity, temperature options, and other factors. Limited battery warranty covers defects and materials for 10 years or 100,000 miles, whichever occurs first. See owner's manual for complete warranty details and limitations. Visit HyundaiUSA.com or call 562-314-4603 for more details.
America's favorite place to watch football is Stadium Swim, located at Circa Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. Catch all the biggest games at a viewing experience built for sports fans. Chill in one of their 6 pools on 3 different levels for a perfect view of their massive screen. Plenty of seating options from cozy daybeds to private, temperature-controlled cabanas. Stadium Swim. Book your spot today at circalasvegas.com.
Specs is your one-stop shop for Pop with lower prices on all his Father's Day favorites. Score more for less with a Texas-sized selection of world-class wines, rare spirits, local craft beers, and even custom-made gift baskets loaded up with the perfect paternal picks. So when it's time to give props to Pops, just raise a glass of class to the man who wiped your nose. Because when Father's Day starts at Specs, the fun starts here.
That wraps up there, and we go to the goaltending, and we begin with a backup goaltender who got thrown into action when an injury happened to Jake Ottinger and Scott Wedgwood. So, 2-part question: overall grade for Wedgwood, David, and how much of a raise will he get on the free market, and do you think they bring him back?
I think his raise is going to be like really modest if he does. I think mainly because there's not enough of a sample size. And I thought Wedgwood was good. Like I would give him probably an A-, B+. I think I'm not sure just because it's kind of, right. We usually rely on things like recency bias. And like the last time we saw Wedgwood play was, I don't even know when, but it was a long time ago. Right. And so, yeah, I think it's just a quality backup goaltender, but I also think it's just really difficult for teams to kind of quote unquote gamble on a backup who's probably a little bit better than what they assume, but also paid more than what they actually deliver. So it's tough, man. Being a backup in this league is just really, really tough. And I think he's earned a pay raise. I just don't know that, I would like to see him back, but I don't know what the price is.
Last game was on April 6th, 32 games played, 2.85 goals against, .899 save percentage. And we end with probably one of the more polarizing players on the team. I like to call him the Dak Prescott of the Dallas Stars, in that every game he's talked about, and if every goal goes in, he's certainly talked about. Regarding even if it's a good goal, even if it's top shelf, people think he should have stopped it in Jake Ottinger.
I'm going to go with a B. I feel like he was a player that obviously struggled early in the season. And then just kind of after the All-Star break, really seemed to kind of find himself and leveled up and played extremely well. And then the playoffs roll around and it kind of sort of maybe regresses, quote unquote, to the mean, so to speak. And he's good, but not as good as he was during that stretch where, it was between the All-Star break and the end of the regular season. And so I think broadly speaking, he was good. Seemed like he was able to kind of become the player he once was, and just really kind of wasn't necessarily the difference maker towards the end there. And I don't necessarily think I don't necessarily pin, like, for example, the Edmonton series on Ottinger. There were a lot of reasons for why Dallas lost that series, and some reasons that weren't necessarily having to do with Dallas. But I don't really see Ottinger as the problem. And I think for the most part, I think he can look back on the season and say he had a good one. Tough start, but yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. I give both goaltenders Bs, and I think there's a next Jake Ottinger level, and hopefully he can achieve that. I don't disagree. I am Jake Ottinger biased. I love him in a Dallas Stars uniform. Just want to throw that. I loved him at Boston University. Love that the Stars drafted him. Feels though he's done it at every level. Love his quiet confidence. Love that he can, and Pete DeBoer mentions this time after time, that, bounce back games, Jake Ottinger's the man. And certainly statistics prove that is true. But, we all know the potential is there to be a top 4 goaltender in this, league, and probably this year might have sat at 7, 8, or 9. So looking for a better season for Jake Ottinger, because we all know that he can play to that potential. It wasn't necessarily bad, and we don't know how much the injury affected him when he came back. But at the same time, one thing we do know about Jake Ottinger is that, the competitive spirit is certainly there. Sean mentions it a lot. So, David, that was quite the grading process. Appreciate that. You are a dean for all those grades, and I am just a lowly professor. However, this has been an absolute blast. And my friend, thank you for taking the time in this off season once again to support David. And this is really important. I'm not going to go on a long rant, but when we talk about the people that are part of Spits and Suds bringing you this content, we need to support David writing for D Magazine and supporting him with his Substack called Star Stack. And so many of you have signed up for Sean's Substack, and that's super cool. And if you could sign up for David's as well, that would be great. David doesn't want to talk about it, but I'll talk about it for him. Very talented writer. And you can see that on the Substack. And if for some reason you can't do that, just let D Magazine know that they have done an outstanding job as far as hiring Robert Tiffin, David Castillo, Sean Shapiro, Spits and Suds guys, as far as the coverage. So stick tap to D Magazine, and stick tap to Leah Simakopoulos of the Dallas Morning News, who I think did a really nice job this year. My friend, we will talk to you soon. Hopefully we can get you to come back on the program soon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for staying up late.
Always. Listen, you guys keep listening to this program. So the promise is we're going to give you quality off-season programming, and hopefully you enjoyed tonight's program as much as David and I did. Once again, we'll talk to Kaylee Lewis. Super excited about that. The Lady Catamount out of McKinney, Texas. We'll talk about her career, talk about her growing up a Dallas Stars fan, and talk about, what she thinks of Hannah Bilka, Allison Simpson, as she skated with them. Who has she skated with? Just a whole bunch of things as we continue to focus on DFW hockey players. So for David Castillo, I'm Gavin Spittle. Thank you once again for supporting Spits and Suds, and we'll talk to you soon.